Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dynamic Dialogue. This is October 12th. I can't believe October is almost halfway over, but it is. So we're going to be going through today's presentation, and then I'll tell you what we have in store for the rest of the year. And we'll be launching into 2022 before we know it. So here we go. We'll just jump right in. Today, we're going to talk about disruptions, so how we respond to those, what causes those, all kinds of things. This is one in a series of dynamic dialogue webinars. We do these the second and the fourth Tuesdays of the month, and we are going to do that through the end of the year. We're going to have the next one on October 26th. We have a new time. We're using 11:15, and we're trying to finish about noon. This link is good. It's good for the rest of the year. And then in January, there'll be a new link. So let's jump right in and talk about disruptions. What is a disruption? Many of you have probably felt like this at one time or another if you're in the supply chain. If you've been in the supply chain profession for any time at all, what you will have felt is that you're in the middle and you're trying to hold this supply chain together. You're the only one that really has a handle on both sides, and you're trying to balance that and make sure that that stays solid for your company, for yourself, for your own activities, and trying to help both sides, both the supplier and the customer. So if you felt like that, you're not alone. But disruptions that we're trying to work on, avoid, handle, all of the above, is really a disturbance, or maybe it's a problem. And it's a disruption because it interrupts planned activities. So we've all had the best laid plans, and we all do that as a matter of course. Good employees plan, they have their schedule set out, they know what they're intending to do, but in the supply chain world, often things happen, and that interrupts that planned activity. So these disruptions can be slowdowns, they can be actual work stoppages, or they can be brief or elongated interruptions in the production or the flow of goods and services through that supply chain. It can be a breakdown in the manufacturing area. So it can be that a company can no longer produce, or for some period of time can't produce what they intended to produce. That flow of goods is stopped. It can also be a stoppage in a service for whatever reason. And it can be impacting our customers, our ultimate customers, because as we know, the supply chain runs from lower level suppliers through a production manufacturing stage into retailers, distributors, and ultimately to the customers. So those customers can be distributors, warehouses, retailers, or they can be the end use customer for that. But anything that causes an unexpected slowdown, stoppage, or just an interruption or repeated interruptions is what we call the disruption. And those are things that we all know very well, but we don't like to deal with very much. And we don't want to see those in our business. So let's just take a look at the current environment. Although most of you can spout some of these, here's some statistics I found. These I found from September version of the Supply Chain Quarterly from CSCMP. And they found in a survey they did that 87% of the companies that responded said they were negatively affected by supply chain issues in the last year. That's not really surprising. I'm surprised it's not 100%, but they say 87%. 60% of responders indicated that they had at some point in time an inability to purchase items due to a shortage. So over the course of the last year, they had at some point either not found what they needed, but they had a supplier renege on them and tell them that they couldn't supply it, but they were not able to purchase all the things they wanted to because of some shortage. 51% of the companies that responded said that they were forced to cancel orders. That's a huge number. And 40% had to allocate or ration their inventories in order to keep going and keep some kind of production and some kind of flow of goods and services going. So that's the business piece of it. They also did some interesting questions on personal impacts. And they found that 80% of people are concerned with the disruptions to their own life plans, things like travel, things like their holiday plans. They're concerned that all of these disruptions are going to impact their own personal life in some way, shape, or form. And that's not just maybe I won't find enough toilet paper at the grocery store anymore, because that's long past for most people. But they're still concerned that these things are going to impact their personal life. 90% said they have or they will alter their buying behavior. And that's typically buying more things in bulk. So all of the times we ran out of things last year, now people, individuals are saying, not just companies, but people are saying, I'm not going to buy like that anymore. I'm going to buy more of these kinds of goods. So that's good business for Sam's Club and Costco and maybe even Walmart. But that says that's going to send different patterns through that supply chain when you look at point of sale data and you look at consumption rates. So 90% of the people responding to this said that they are altering their own personal buying behavior. 43% admitted that they've missed gifts due to supply chain issues, or they've attributed that. Either they were trying to buy something for someone and it got held up, or they weren't able to acquire what they wanted. And 17% actually said that they had hurt people they care about because of some of these disruptions. I found this a really interesting study and asking questions that I would not necessarily have asked about these personal impacts. But we think a lot about things in terms of the business impact. But what we're finding here is that it's affecting not only personal lives, but it's affecting, it's not affecting only business lives, it's affecting personal lives too. And as business people, our personal perspectives do infiltrate into our business decisions. So let's take a look at another study. Resolink does a lot of good information and they have a lot of studies out. This one I thought was very telling because they show by 6-month periods from late 2019, the first half of 2020, and then the first half of 2021. So I'm sorry, it's the first half of 2019. So they have 3 periods of 6 months, January to July or to June. So they looked at how many occurrences there were of all kinds of things. From factory fires, you can see in the first half of 2019, 281 reported. This year, 863 factory fires. That's a huge amount of increase, and that's a huge amount of factory fires going on. Then mergers and acquisitions, that's a big change. You would expect a pretty significant change because of the pandemic and some of the financial issues that resulted from that, but those numbers are still staggering. Business sales, again, from the pandemic, you would expect that to be up, but 85 in 2019, and 2 years later, this year, the first half, 640 business sales. Factory disruptions, again, up quite a bit. The interesting thing I find there is that 2020 was down a bit from 2019, which is interesting. The first half, there were all kinds of disruptions, but maybe they didn't notice the disruptions because companies shut down themselves and they weren't working. So it's an interesting kind of thing to dig into. You can see leadership transitions, supply shortages, recalls, all kinds of things are going on there. Labor and port disruptions, of course, we know recently have just gone through the roof. But then things like legal actions, that's up threefold. Cyber attacks, we've been reading about that, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those. Extreme weather, you can see that. We know that this has been a rough hurricane season for a lot of places, especially in the South, along the Texas, Louisiana, and into Florida, some of that area. Earthquakes, about the same, slightly up. Chemical spills up considerably, volcanoes up considerably. It's something that you can't pin on the pandemic no matter how hard you try. Regulatory issues and then compliance issues. So a lot of things causing disruptions in the workplace. And this chart is a little harder to see, but This one talks about the waves that intersect through the supply chain. So they're looking at things like life sciences, which has a lot to do with the pandemic. So that is at 63%. Then healthcare. Automotive is a big concern, and that, of course, is due in large part to the chips. If you've been following that at all, you'll see that many of the major automobile companies have restructured their production. They've reset their expectations for revenue and production goals because they can't get chips. That translates also into high tech, which is if the automobile companies can't get chips, that means a lot of other manufacturers can't get chips too. And that's caused by the increase in at-home electronics that companies not working on site now need. People that work. I myself bought a camera last year. I bought a microphone. I bought things I would not have bought pre-pandemic just because of that. And I know many people who bought new computers, new monitors, multiple monitors, did lots of things to try to be more comfortable working from home. And everything kind of cascades and crosses into this. So we're living in very volatile times, and in supply chains, all of those volatilities add up to potential and actually realized disruptions. So there's a lot going on in the world. Then we want to look at some of the typical causes for this. Some of the causes are natural, and we're used to tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, droughts. I'm here in Southern California, and a couple years ago in 2018, actually, we were evacuated from our home due to a threat from fire. I've come from the Midwest. I grew up there, and there's Tornado Alley, hurricanes we've talked about. There's been droughts all over, causing lots of problems. And then the other part of the hurricanes is often flood damage that happens. We all remember back into early this year when there was the ice storms and the freezing temperatures in Texas and across the South, which caused a lot of problems, particularly to the chemical industry. And a lot of companies still are recovering from that. That chemical industry is still trying to rebound from all of those issues. We're used to man-made disasters, unfortunately. We have things like fires and arson. Sometimes those are man-made, and sometimes they're man-caused, even if they're not full-on arson. They may be caused by an error or bad wiring or something like that that causes that. We have workplace events, everything from strikes, which are still happening and threatening. The blue flus that they named because the police and firefighters used to call in at certain times, but we're seeing other companies do that too. We're seeing other companies where the workers are not coming to work en masse. There are lots of call-ins to take time off because they don't like the working conditions. They don't like something about that. So it's not a full-on strike, but it is definitely a change in the normal expected workforce. Then we have more sinister things like shootings in the workplace, which have been up over the last few years. Things like bomb threats are still happening. So there's a lot of workplace events that are going on. And then there's the general terrorism when we have airports and different areas that could potentially affected by that. Geopolitical things, we know there's a lot of politics and things going on here in the States, but even things like Brexit can cause disruptions. It's more for European countries and those in the UK and Britain, but it affects everyone worldwide. Financial instability, we've seen a lot of that because of COVID and not because of COVID. And that can be because of something like a pandemic or just a general economic downturn. And then typically when we talked about cybersecurity, we talked about viruses. We talked about a little bit of hacking, but viruses were one of the main issues that companies were concerned with. Now let's look at what's actually happened. We had the pandemic. We have the pandemic. We are still in the middle of the pandemic. We had the issues with toilet paper. Thankfully, those are mostly behind us, as are most of the masks, ventilators, PPE, all of those kinds of things. But there are still some residuals from that. There are still some products that are hard to get, hard to obtain, that are not back into the shelves at the pre-pandemic levels. Things like Clorox wipes, sanitizing products. Clorox wipes, they have said several times that they think it will be the end of 2021 or into 2022, the first quarter, before they can get products stocked to the levels that they had pre-pandemic. We're not necessarily seeing shortages or outages at the stores that we saw a year ago or a year and a half ago, but they're still not as they're not as abundantly available as they were that. I'll give you an example. My husband and I buy the sanitizer, the antibacterial soap, and refill some things in our house. We went to look for the refill that we have bought for a long time, that at various and sundry places, and we really can't find it. He did find one that was not the brand that we bought before, and it's not really the same consistency. It's more, it's not as thick. So when it comes out of the dispenser, it kind of goes all over the place. And so it's not making either one of us very happy. So there's a lot of things. Remember when we had the pandemic at the beginning, where there were cereals that were out, canned goods that were out, a lot of other kinds of foods that were in short supply. Now what we're seeing though is there's foodstuffs back in the grocery stores, but the prices are going through the roof. All the things that we buy as staples seem to be rising. The price of chicken, the price of pasta, the price of this and that and the other seems to be going up. And don't even get me started on the price of oil. Not necessarily related to the pandemic, but all causing disruptions or potential disruptions. Then we learned new words at the beginning of this year. Cyber events. We used to talk about viruses a lot. Now we talk about ransomware. And you probably all remember the April issue with Colonial Pipeline. People were hoarding gasoline in plastic bags and bins, and that's really scary because that is not how you're supposed to store gasoline. Colonial Pipeline ended up paying $4.4 million in Bitcoin. They requested the payment in Bitcoin so they could supposedly make it transparent. But the FBI has been able to recover a large amount of the Bitcoin. They were able to track some of those transactions. But finding those hackers themselves has proven to be a lot more difficult. At the same time Colonial Pipeline was going on, Brentag was also attacked. And they were asked to pay $7.5 million. They ended up paying $4.4 million for that to protect the data privacy and the information that they had. But these are serious issues, and we're seeing more and more of this. We're seeing more hackers that are actually getting private information from companies, that they are stealing things like social security numbers and driver's license information, credit card information, all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we all are aware of the electronic chip issues. As I said, automobile companies are feeling that severely. Most, if not all of them, have reset their expectations and their projections for 2021 based on the limited availability of these chips. It's been part of an act that President Biden did in February to issue a supply chain task force, basically, to look at things like including electronic chips, to see where they're produced. How are we going to be able to get out of that? And if you've been following this, you know that there's a lot of companies who are working hard on this. And there are companies even like Intel here in the United States that says they're going to put a lot of money into infrastructure to create more factories to build these. But as I tell my students at the university where I teach, occasionally, I teach a couple classes during the semester, and I tell them these factories do not go up quickly, and these processes are not short processes. So lead times on these parts in many cases are exceeding 52 weeks. There are 60-week lead times that I've seen routinely quoted by companies who are trying to make enough parts that they can sell wherever in the world. So there's a real challenge there. So how do we manage these disruptions? Managing disruptions isn't rocket science. In fact, it's really sometimes more of an art than a science, but it's really important as you identify them, and it's important that you identify them as early as possible. That means you have to regularly check with suppliers on your open order status. Even tried and true suppliers that you've done business with for many years, you need to make sure if you have open orders that you're checking on the status regularly, especially if they have medium to long lead times, or they're supplying goods that you see in the news or that you know are volatile for any other reason. So you need to be monitoring all of that. Once you know there's even a potential issue, then you have to switch from monitoring and awareness into problem solving mode. First, think very short term. What can I do with what I have? What can I do with what I know right now? Can I throw money at this? That's not something that companies have traditionally done, but what they're doing today is saying, okay, what would it take? Where can I put some money to help me get this done? Can I expedite? Can I authorize overtime? Can I offer suppliers incentives or bonuses, or what else can be done? So what I caution is to initially keep an eye on your assurance of supply. Get the bare number minimum of parts you need to get through the next few days or the couple of weeks. If you can get more than that, great. But what I see is companies kind of knee-jerk say, oh, if this is going to be short, then I want the next 3 months worth of parts and I want them immediately. So they're scrambling trying to get 3 months worth of parts, when that's going to be a lot harder than getting the next 2 weeks and then the next 2 weeks and then the next 2 weeks. So focus on the very short term, on the assurance of supply to keep things going in your factory with your own flow of goods and material, and also satisfying your own customers in the immediate short term. That's not to say you don't want to look at other things, but make sure that you look at what you can do first, and then think about what else you could do. Can we change our production lineup? Can we change our product mix and make some other parts instead, so that we can wait until we have more and can make a bigger batch of this product that needs this part that's in short supply? Can you contact alternate suppliers? Are there alternate suppliers? Are there other places to acquire these parts? Can we actually cannibalize other parts maybe that aren't selling, other inventories? Can we do something different or find a substitute part very quickly? So anything and everything should be on the table. But again, at first, you're really thinking about what are my immediate needs and what can I do very quickly to keep myself going and keep the business going. And then after you can take a step back or half a step back, this is like the triage in a medical unit. Once you stop the bleeding, then you can figure out, okay, what is the whole scope of the problem? What is everything else that I need to look at? If you don't stop that bleeding through these short-term actions, then you may not live to fight another day. So find out what you need very short-term, put those Band-Aids in place, and then take that little bit of a step back and look at it from a higher perspective. What can I do for this supplier? Is this supplier viable going forward? Or is this a sign of the times that this supplier is not going to be able to do what they've done for me in the past? So do I need to start looking for other suppliers, and how quickly can I do that? You want to look at what is my viability, what is my risk going forward, what are the other things that I need to do. I say longer term because it's not really a long-term activity. It's probably a very mid to medium term. After you stop this initial issue, then what can you do next, and finally longer term solutions. It's important both short term and longer term to get some commitments, to try to get something with some teeth in it that you can actually count on and hold your supplier accountable for. But also it's that trust but verify. Make sure that you're not making a commitment or not taking someone's commitment with not much meat behind it. It's very important to get some kind of assurance and understand that. So ask for the information you need to validate and confirm that the trust that you have in them is warranted. It's an old adage, but it's still good advice. This is not my grandmother, but I can hear my grandmother telling me this. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's the same with disruptions. So if you can prevent them, then that's much more cost effective and a much better use of resources than trying to cure it when it's already happened and there's big gaps in your production, there's no parts on the shelves, or maybe there's too much coming in of the wrong type or size. So your best strategy is to be proactive. It's to take that bull by the horns before you have those issues and really think about how can we manage through these. One thing to do is to get your team familiar with risk-based thinking. That's looking at heat maps. That's looking at the different dimensions of probability and impact when it comes to risks, and making sure they're thinking along those lines with every decision they make, every supplier that they select, every purchase order that they send out, every quote that they issue to get some information back. What is the risk associated with that? And that risk comes in two dimensions, both the probability, the likelihood of that happening, and the impact if it does happen. If it's low probability, low risk, then that's okay. Then that's not something you should spend a lot of time worrying about. If it's high probability, there's a good chance it's going to happen, and it's high impact, that's where you need to put some resources. And if it's in the middle, then you need to ascertain what that means to your company and to your team so that you can put the proper activities in order to manage that. I also say that companies should start rewarding prevention, not firefighters. I've worked for some major corporations in my lifetime, and some of these I find really reward firefighting, and much more so than they reward prevention. So how does your company reward performance? If you're not rewarding the preventers, the people who are the early warning identifiers, then that's what you should be doing. You should be shifting your reward structure to that type of activity, not as much firefighting. Good firefighters are valuable and they should be rewarded, but not over and above what the preventive action people should be rewarded for. It's important to start now. If you can worry and fret and say, well, we haven't done this, we haven't done that, we're going to so far behind. And I tell my clients, start today. You have no other time to start than right now. So if you haven't done it, at least you're aware that you haven't done it. Make that list of what you need to do and take the first steps today. So make sure that you're planning now, looking at how you can avoid and address the issues later as they come up, as they might come up. You might have some signals to tell you these are bubbling and they may come up, but if you can have any resources at all that aren't fighting fires and aren't chasing disruptions, then go figure out how to plan so you can avoid some more of those later. Know your suppliers. I tell my clients this all the time. You really have to know your suppliers, and you have to know the sub-tier suppliers that are critical to your business. So many of the companies I've worked with, my clients and the companies that I've worked for say, oh, we know who our suppliers are. We've got this and this and this. And the next thing you know, there's a disruption, and it's not one of those they mentioned because they really weren't looking at the total picture. So you can't dig into every supplier, but you really need to know, based on the components, based on the parts, the sub-assemblies they provide, if they're unique, if they're doing something for you that no one else is doing, then you need to pay attention. The depth of attention you need to pay depends on a lot of different factors, but you need to be aware of that. If it's not something that's a commodity that you can get easily from many different sources, then pay attention. And we used to think some of the resistors and capacitors were in those buckets where, yeah, we can get them from anywhere. Not so much anymore. There are some parts in there that are in short supply that might surprise you. So be aware of that. Use early warning signals. Look for the ways you can identify the potential threats. This can come from suppliers. Again, get regular order status from your suppliers. If they haven't done that in the past, encourage them to do that. If they have any anomalies in what they're doing and how they're giving you status, then you better check into that. Look into the marketplace. It doesn't matter if you use electronic chips or not on a regular basis. Who in your world is using those? Who might be affected by those? How might that affect other suppliers? It makes sense to look at this from a holistic, not just this is my world and this is my tunnel and I'm not going to look outside of it. You might find that suppliers are impacted by that in ways that can affect your business, even if you're not buying electronic parts from them, because it might affect their financials, it might affect their workforce composition, it might affect their other customers, and their ability to do business with you may be impacted by that. This is a time when it's very important to have metrics, to be monitoring your supplier performance and monitoring your customer activity. Are they still giving you the forecast from the customer like they have been for the last 5 years? Are they changing radically? Are you getting different messages from suppliers and or customers? And what does that mean? Look at the metrics. How do you measure them and how do you measure yourself for performing with them? If it's a customer activity, what's the customer sat data? And also, what is your sales and marketing team tell you about the customer activity? Is that changing due to whatever else? So again, you want to look at current disruptions, what's happening, any anomalies, look at communication and personnel changes in your suppliers, in your customers as well, and anywhere along that supply chain, because those can be signals of what's happening or not happening that might impact you. For prevention, the best thing I can recommend is risk assessments on your suppliers. And right now I'm suggesting that this is done quarterly. This does not have to be a 3-day resource and a commitment. It's really about making your list of criteria, making your list of suppliers and reviewing with them on a quarterly basis what's changed, what hasn't changed, things like their employment levels, things like their financial projections, things like their inventory levels, their debt. Have they increased? You don't have to know what their debt is, but has their debt ratio increased or decreased? Or has their debt increased or decreased? You have to ask the questions. Sometimes suppliers are unwilling to tell you, but oftentimes they're willing to tell you information if you ask the question in a different way or allow them to give you a sense of how they're doing in that area without giving you actual numbers. They may not want to tell you that they've reset their revenue projections, but they may tell you that it's down or that it's up or that it's changing by a certain percentage. And then you can ask for rationale for that. Why is that? So financial viability is something you always want to check with suppliers on. It's important. You want to find out what kinds of reviews they're doing with their suppliers and what kinds of business continuity plans they have in place. It's important for companies to do their own business continuity and to have the supply chain as part of those business continuity exercises. I've seen companies where they say, well, we really don't need the supply chain. We really don't need the production. We really don't need the purchasing. We have the production, so we think we're covered. Not a good idea. You need all facets, the logistics, the supply chain, the operations, the planning. How are you going to handle that in a business continuity situation? So make sure that you do those exercises and include all of those key functions. And make sure that your suppliers are doing risk assessments and business continuity plans and planning with their suppliers as well. Next thing I say to prevent is make sure you know where your suppliers are, tier 1, tier 2, and some of the tier 3 suppliers. When the pandemic first was coming on in March of last year, and we heard a lot of things about China, I talked to several colleagues and they said, you know, we really don't buy that much from China. We don't think we're going to be impacted very much. Well, it turns out that they never did buy very much from China, but guess what? Their suppliers did, and their support organizations did, and their customers did. So they found out that the interactions with China were more impactful than they had imagined, just because they weren't buying directly from suppliers in China. Some companies actually found out that they were buying parts from China, but they were being imported by their supplier and then sold through. So, or they were imported in a subassembly form, finalized somewhere else besides China, and then actually shipped to the customer. So you know where your suppliers are, know where your distributors are, and what their inventory policies are. Make sure you track inventory. There may be inventory stockpiled in an area that may be advantageous for you or may be very unadvantageous for you. So look at that, whether your company owns it or not. If you're transacting inventory, you can track those transactions and know where inventory is going or not. It's important to have contingency plans and do those what if scenarios. So what if this happens? What do we do? What if that happens? What if it doesn't happen? What do we do then? What are the things that we're going to do? How can we make that work for us? And then try to diversify your supply base and your supply chain as much as possible. Know the capabilities and the locations. It's often that larger companies have multiple locations where they can do things like manufacture products. They have other capabilities that you might not have tapped into. So if you have an issue with a supplier that needs these certain processes, you might have another supplier in your database already in your supply pool that you're using, but you haven't tapped into those other capabilities or that other opportunity there. And many companies now are finding new business by offering a wider range of processing and capabilities to their current customers to try to fill in where other suppliers have let a customer down. I wish I could tell you there's a cure for disruptions, but there isn't. So always you need to be able to expect the unexpected. That's if you've worked in operations, if you've worked in supply chain for any length of time, you know that stuff happens. And it's usually Murphy's Law is well and sound in those areas. Something goes wrong and at the worst possible time. So look for those things. One way to do that is to raise the flags early. Don't wait until the crisis is in full swing. This is an area where companies have trained people for years. Don't tell me that there's something wrong. First, go see if you can fix it, and don't raise a bunch of flags. Don't cry wolf, right? This is a different kind of environment. Right now, many people are not crying wolf, but they do need to raise their hand when they see things that are not as usual, when they have a feeling that there's something that's not right. So make sure that you encourage people to raise those flags early and get the attention on them before it's too late. So, and then look at those early warning signs. Don't just say, oh, well, I'll go back and check that later. Don't assume. It's not in your best interest. It's not in your company's best interest to make a lot of assumptions and to not act on things when it's brought to your attention that something's not right here, or this doesn't look like it's going to be a good thing for us. The other thing that I can't encourage enough is don't hoard and don't encourage stockpiling. Every company wants to get healthy and they want to have lots of parts and not have to worry about that. But when every company is trying to stockpile and get more safety stock and get 3 or 4 or 6 months of inventory, that's just adding extra demand that's not actually required right now into the marketplace, and that's creating even more shortages. So again, go back to what do I need right now to get through the next 2 weeks, the next month, maybe the next 2 months, but and know what you need for the next year and for the next 18 months, for the next 2 years, but don't pull out all the stops trying to get all of those parts now. Get a plan where you can get continual deliveries of material. And I know that's difficult to do, but that's a better solution for everyone. If you get commitments where you can incrementally have parts coming in, than trying to fill your warehouse right now with parts so you just don't have to worry about any of that anymore. It's not helping the overall situation. And learn to collaborate with your stakeholders. It's important to try to get win-win scenarios. Okay, I really need 6 months of this, but I can take 3 of it now. But if you do this for me, then I'll do that for you. And then I'll have that commitment, and then I'll be able to continue my business, and you'll be able to satisfy other customers, and we'll have a good dialogue about that once a month and make sure everything is moving in that direction. And if I can take less, I'll let you know that. If my demand changes or if my demand increases, I will let you know that, and tell me what you can do too with what your other suppliers are doing. It's important to have that win-win attitude, trying to find ways that are going to work for everybody versus trying to push somebody out or win, because these wins are not going to be long-term wins. So here's the outlook for 2021, this last quarter that we're halfway into October now, in 2022. I looked at different projections, and they talk about droughts. We've had very dry weather. I'm in Southern California, we have very dry weather here, and they don't see a lot of that abating anytime soon. Fires. We've had a particularly bad fire year, the last year and a half. And so the fires are continuing. There's still fires burning. There's a pretty major fire fairly close to me in Santa Barbara area that closed the 101, which is, or the one, which is a big highway up there. And it's not good. And just when the fire is put out, that means other things begin. So there's a lot of after fire cleanup that has to happen. Sometimes it's on the roads, sometimes it's to the structures that were damaged, homes or other buildings. Sometimes it's to the area itself to clean up, to make sure that it doesn't cause other problems with the ecology of the area. So there's a lot of challenges with the fires. Hurricanes, there's more hurricanes, and there's some pretty bad storms, tornadoes and things going through Oklahoma and the Midwest. I still have family in the Kansas City area and St. Louis, and there were some pretty fierce storms going through there. We're coming into winter, and who knows what that's going to bring. There's a lot of COVID issues. There's a lot of COVID things themselves. There's a lot of interpretations of the protocols and the constraints and the shoulds and the have tos and all of that. That's going to go on. I wish that was going to be over, but I have to tell you that everything I read says that we're still going to be dealing with COVID aftermath for a while. It's not just going to magically disappear. These chip shortages too, they are not going to magically disappear. So that's going to affect the electronics market. It's affecting automobiles and the cost of automobiles. So a lot of things are being affected by that, and that's going to go well into 2022. Some projections show that into 2023 before it actually gets alleviated and resolved. And then there's a lot more climate concerns, a lot more actions being taken around that. As we know, there's a lot of political things going on in Washington. There's trying to pass bills to do infrastructure. They're trying to do a lot of other things. So it's going to be kind of an interesting time for the next, for the rest of this year and probably all of next year. But what I know for sure is there's a better way to manage disruptions. And it starts with sound, risk-based decision-making and comprehensive supply management. Know your suppliers. So know what risk-based decision-making is. It's making those decisions, assessing both the probability of something going wrong and the impact if that does. So what could go wrong? What are the risks associated with the decisions that we make every day? What are the impacts of those, and how are we going to move forward? Supplier management is comprised of 4 different aspects. Performance of suppliers, so look at what you're expecting, look at what you're getting, and if that's not right, change your expectations and monitor and manage your supplier so that their performance gives you what you need. But you have to build and maintain relationships with those suppliers. With everybody that's not a transactional supplier, look at the state of those relationships, how you want those to improve. There's risk everywhere right now. All the things that I just looked at are very volatile, plus many, many more for any particular industry, any particular business. And you need a staff that understands this, that can work through these issues with suppliers, with their stakeholders to build the relationships, identify and manage the risk, mitigate the risk. It's important that you keep your eye on all of that. The other thing I say is it's important to learn from these experiences. We're not going through these just because we decided it'd be fun to do this for a change. You want to learn. That means as these things come up, document what you're doing, why you're doing it, the options that you have, the actions that you take, and the outcomes. If you keep track of this, then when you can take another little bit of a breath, make sure that you have a review and say, what did we learn from this? What do we do differently? What worked? What didn't work? What should we have done? What might we have done that we can do now? We didn't do it before, but now we can put this in place, and that's going to help us for the next step and the next step and the next step. Remember, this is a continuous improvement activity. None of us are perfect. None of our businesses are perfect. We're all seeking to get better. And if we can learn and apply the learning and develop new learning as we go, then it's the best we can do. We make those improvements, we incorporate those improvements, we share those with our key stakeholders so that they're not doing things that are not worthwhile, and then continue to improve along this journey. So that's what I have for you today. Dynamic dialogue is going to continue through the rest of the year. On October 26th, we're going to talk about supplier differentiation or segmentation, or how you tell the difference between an important supplier and any other supplier. On the 9th of November, we're going to talk about supplier strategies. So that'll be a follow on to the differentiation. The week of Thanksgiving, I am going to take a little bit of a break, and so we're not going to have a webinar that week. Then when we get back into December, we're going to talk about supply chains into 2022 and look at what's ahead for all of us into 2022. And then again on the 28th, that's between the holidays, and so that will be a free time as well. And then we'll resume in January, and I'll give you more information about what that looks like in the upcoming webinars. So that's what we're going to do. You can check out our website, http://purplelink.net, purple-link.net at events, or you can contact me directly. If you're interested in discussing this or other topics, you can set up a free 30-minute call with me. Just go to callwithjane.com. It helps to put the HTTP, all that stuff in it, but callwithjane.com will take you directly to my calendar, and you can set up a free 30-minute call. Again, we're going to do some different things. I had a CPSM exam class that has been delayed till January, but I didn't update my slide, so that's not it. And the other two are also going to be pushed into 2022. So lots of stuff going on. So here is not the slide that I thought it was going to be, because it was supposed to be on disruptions, but the idea is for disruptions is to avoid that. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's what you want to do. So let me stop recording this.